The embassy burned. Flames licked through shattered windows on the third floor, casting dancing orange reflections across the marble courtyard below. Smoke billowed into the December night sky above Washington, D.C., obscuring the twin moons of the Volari homeworld that hung impossibly close to Earth's own pale satellite. Somewhere inside that inferno, alarms screamed in frequencies both human and alien, a discordant symphony of chaos that had erupted exactly 14 minutes ago when the first explosion tore through the eastern wing. Marcus Webb crawled through darkness. The ventilation shaft pressed against his shoulders, cold metal biting through his torn maintenance uniform. Blood seeped from a wound in his left shoulder, leaving a dark trail behind him as he dragged himself forward inch by agonizing inch. 68 years old, arthritic knees that screamed with every movement, a spine that had been giving him trouble since the Gulf War. None of it mattered now. Behind him, boots thundered through the corridor below. Voices barked orders in the melodic language of the Volari, but the words carried unmistakable urgency. Find him. Find the old human. Do not let him reach the Queen. Marcus paused at a junction in the ductwork, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Sweat mixed with blood dripped from his forehead onto the metal beneath him. In his right hand, he clutched a small knife, the only weapon he had managed to grab during his escape from the detention cell. In his left pocket, pressing against his thigh, with every movement, lay a copper coin worn smooth by decades of handling. Thomas's coin. His son's lucky charm carried through basic training, through 2 deployments, through everything until that day in Fallujah when luck ran out. Marcus pulled the coin free, holding it up to catch the faint light filtering through a nearby grate. 21 years since Thomas died. 5 years since cancer took Margaret. And now here he was, bleeding in an air duct hunted by aliens, trying to save a queen he had known for barely 3 weeks. His son would have laughed at the absurdity. Margaret would have called him a fool. Both of them would have been right. The sound of an explosion somewhere deeper in the building shook the ductwork, and Marcus steadied himself against the walls. Ambassador Vorath's voice crackled through the embassy's internal speakers, smooth and confident despite the chaos. Attention all personnel. The human fugitive Marcus Webb is armed and dangerous. He is to be apprehended immediately. The Queen's safety depends on his capture. Marcus almost laughed, armed and dangerous. He was 68 years old with a pocket knife and bad knees. The most dangerous thing about him was his stubbornness. But Vorath was right about one thing. The Queen's safety did depend on what happened in the next few hours. Just not in the way Vorath wanted anyone to believe. Marcus tucked the coin back into his pocket and resumed crawling. The pain in his shoulder had settled into a persistent throb that he could almost ignore if he focused on other things, like the layout of the ventilation system, like the location of the royal chambers, like the fact that somewhere below him, Serafina was preparing to sign a treaty that would seal her death warrant, 72 hours. That was all the time that had passed since this nightmare began. 72 hours since Marcus Webb's quiet, invisible life had collided with forces he never could have imagined. 72 hours since he walked through the wrong door. The Volari Embassy occupied 12 acres of prime real estate in northwest Washington, a sprawling complex of crystal spires and flowing architecture that had risen from nothing in the span of 3 months following first contact. The technology that made such rapid construction possible remained classified, shared only in fragments through carefully negotiated treaties. What Marcus knew about the Volari came mostly from orientation packets and workplace safety briefings. They were long-lived, averaging 400 years. They were humanoid but distinctly alien, with skin tones ranging from deep crimson to pale rose and eyes that shifted color with their emotions. They had found Earth through some kind of faster-than-light detection system that humanity still did not fully understand. And they were by all accounts peaceful, curious, eager to establish relations with the strange, short-lived species they had discovered on this small blue world. Marcus had been working the night shift at the embassy for 9 months when the announcement came that Queen Serafina herself would be visiting Earth to sign a historic peace treaty. The Comprehensive Alliance Accord, they called it. A framework for cultural exchange, technological sharing, and mutual defense that would bind humanity and the Volari together for generations. The embassy staff had been in a frenzy of preparation for weeks. Extra security, diplomatic protocols, endless meetings that Marcus observed only through the glimpses he caught while repairing air conditioning units and replacing light fixtures. He was maintenance, background, furniture with a pulse. That suited him fine. 3 days before the Queen's arrival, Marcus had been working late in the East Wing, troubleshooting a climate control malfunction that had been driving the Volari staff crazy. Their physiology required specific temperature and humidity ranges, and the embassy's system struggled to maintain the delicate balance between human comfort and alien necessity. Marcus had spent 6 hours tracing the problem to a faulty sensor in a secondary control room, and by the time he finished the repair, the corridors were empty and silent. He remembered the exact moment everything changed. 2:17 in the morning, walking back to the maintenance office to log his work and clock out. The hallways all looked the same in the dim overnight lighting, gold and green and crystal, like walking through an art museum after closing. He had been thinking about Margaret the way he often did during quiet moments, remembering her laugh, the way she used to tease him about his terrible sense of direction. You could get lost in a one-room apartment, Marcus. He had smiled at the memory, and then he had pushed open a door that should have led to a supply closet. The room was not a supply closet. Queen Seraphina stood before a full-length mirror, her back partially turned, her ceremonial robe slipping from her shoulders as she prepared for what must have been a fitting. Amber light from floating lanterns cast warm shadows across skin the color of sunset roses. Her hair fell past her waist, black as ink, catching the light in ways that seemed to defy physics. She was beautiful in a way that transcended species, transcended everything Marcus had ever known about beauty, and she was staring at him. Marcus had frozen. His brain had simply stopped functioning, caught between the impossibility of the situation and the very human recognition that he had just violated every protocol, every rule, every basic standard of decency that existed in any culture anywhere in the universe. His hand had flown to his face, covering his eyes. Words had tumbled out in a panicked rush. Apologies, explanations, more apologies. He had backed toward the door, certain that guards would appear at any moment to drag him away for execution. Instead, he heard something that stopped him cold. "Do you find me beautiful?" The question had been soft, almost fragile, stripped of any royal authority. Marcus had cracked one eye open, still covering most of his face, and found Seraphina watching him with an expression he could not decipher. Not anger, not outrage, something closer to wonder. That question changed everything. In the decades since Margaret's death, Marcus had learned to recognize loneliness. He saw it in the faces of patients during his years as an ER doctor, in the eyes of fellow veterans at memorial services, in his own reflection during long nights when sleep refused to come. Loneliness had a texture, a weight, a way of settling into a person's bones. Queen Seraphina carried 200 years of it. He had answered honestly because he was too flustered to lie. Yes, he had said. Yes, she was beautiful. Beautiful in a way that would probably get him killed, but beautiful nonetheless. She had laughed, actually laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it surprised him. The guards had not come. Instead, Seraphina had ordered him to return the following evening. Not as a prisoner, not as a criminal, as something else entirely, a teacher. The first lesson had been simple. Board games. Marcus had brought a travel-sized puzzle game from his apartment, the kind of thing he used to play with Thomas during long deployments. Cooperative rather than competitive. Pattern matching. Problem solving. Seraphina had approached it like a military campaign, strategizing moves that would have been appropriate for chess rather than a children's game. Marcus had laughed so hard he nearly choked, and when she demanded to know what was funny, he had explained that the whole point was to work together, to share the experience, to enjoy the process rather than dominate the outcome. She had stared at him like he was speaking an alien language, which in a way he was, but she had tried, awkwardly at first, then with growing fascination. By the end of the evening, she was smiling without self-consciousness, her shoulders relaxed, her voice lighter than Marcus had heard from any Volari in 9 months of employment. The second lesson involved coffee. Marcus showed her how to operate a simple drip maker, measuring grounds, pouring water, waiting for the slow gurgle of brewing. She had tasted the result and made a face that made him laugh again. Bitter, she had declared. Like regret. That's the point, Marcus had replied. Life is bitter. Coffee reminds us that bitter things can still bring comfort. She had finished the entire cup. The third lesson was harder. Speaking without formality. For 200 years, every conversation Seraphina had participated in had been wrapped in layers of protocol and deference. People did not talk to her. They addressed her. They petitioned her. They performed for her. Marcus did not know how to do any of those things. He only knew how to be himself. "Why do you not fear me?" Serafina had asked during their fourth meeting, her voice genuinely curious. Marcus had considered the question carefully before answering. "I buried my wife 5 years ago. Buried my son 21 years before that. I spent 30 years watching people die on operating tables while I did everything in my power to save them. Fear is for people who still have something to lose." Something had shifted in her expression then, a recognition that went deeper than words. "You fear loneliness," she had said quietly. "I can see it in you." He had not denied it. On the sixth night, Serafina gave Marcus a heart cloth. The small piece of crimson silk embroidered with silver thread represented the highest form of trust in Valari culture. Not romantic love necessarily, not commitment, simply the acknowledgement that one person had chosen to be vulnerable with another. "This is the first time I have given such a gift," she told him, "in 200 years. Marcus had held the cloth like it might shatter. "I do not deserve this. You do not have the right to decide that." Serafina's voice carried the authority of empires. "I decide who deserves my trust, and I do not make mistakes." But others had noticed their growing connection. Ambassador Vorath, the queen's cousin, had been watching from the shadows since the night of Marcus's accidental intrusion. Vorath's golden eyes tracked every meeting, every smile, every moment that Marcus and Serafina spent together. And with each observation, his expression grew darker. Marcus had been too caught up in the unlikely friendship to notice the danger gathering around him. The attack came on the seventh night. Marcus had been heading to the Moon Garden for his regular meeting with Serafina when a young Valari guard blocked his path. The guard's arm bore a poorly wrapped wound oozing pale violet blood through the bandages. Marcus's medical instincts kicked in immediately. "That needs proper attention." "Let me help." The guard had recoiled. "Do not touch me, human. You are not permitted." Marcus ignored the protest. He guided the guard to a bench, unwrapped the inadequate bandage, and examined the wound with practiced efficiency. A deep cut, probably from a training accident, showing early signs of infection. He cleaned it with supplies from his personal kit, applied antibiotic ointment formulated for Valari physiology, and rewrapped it with proper compression. The guard stared at him throughout the process, suspicion slowly transforming into something else. "You know our medicine, I know medicine, period." Marcus finished his work and stepped back. Bodies are bodies regardless of species. The details change. The principles stay the same. He did not notice Senior Counselor Lyris watching from a nearby corridor, her ancient eyes taking in every detail of the exchange. That night in the Moon Garden, Serafina seemed different, distracted. Several times she started to speak, then stopped herself. Marcus waited patiently, having learned that pushing rarely helped with anyone human or Valari. Finally, she broke the silence with a question that cut straight through him. "Marcus, if you knew something was coming that you could not stop, would you want to know? Or would you prefer ignorance?" He considered the question carefully. "I watched my wife die slowly over 18 months. Watched the cancer take her piece by piece. Some days I wished I did not know, but most days I was grateful for the warning. It gave me time to say things I needed to say, to be present for moments I would have otherwise missed." Serafina did not respond immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I am dying, Marcus." The words hit him like a physical blow. "What?" She explained slowly, haltingly. "A condition called the fading. It afflicted Valari rulers who had not produced an heir deemed worthy of succession. A biological mechanism meant to ensure that power passed to capable hands. Without a suitable successor, the ruler's body began to consume itself. Serafina had 2 years, perhaps less. The only person who knew was Counselor Lyris, her oldest advisor. Now Marcus knew as well. "Why tell me?" His voice emerged rough, scraped, raw by the revelation. "Because you are the first person in 80 years who has made me feel something other than tired." Serafina's eyes shimmered with moisture that might have been tears. "Because I wanted someone to know. Someone who would not look at me with calculation or pity. Someone who might simply understand." Marcus reached out and took her hand. In Valari culture, the gesture was intimate to the point of scandal. He did not care. Then we make the time count, whatever time is left. They sat in silence, hands intertwined, until the moon set below the embassy walls. The diplomatic reception was Ambassador Vorath's idea. A formal gathering to celebrate the upcoming treaty signing, bringing together Valari dignitaries and representatives from a dozen Earth nations. Marcus received an invitation as Queen Seraphina's cultural advisor, a title that had been hastily created to explain his continued presence in royal circles. He knew it was a trap. The invitation itself practically screamed with contempt, the phrasing carefully designed to emphasize his lowly origins and inappropriate rise. But refusing would create problems for Seraphina, and she had enough problems already. The reception hall glittered with crystal chandeliers and floating light spheres, filling the space with a warm glow that softened the hard edges of political tension. Marcus wore his only suit, a charcoal number he had bought for Margaret's funeral and had not worn since. It hung loosely on his frame, evidence of weight loss to grief and neglect. Vorath intercepted him within minutes of arrival. The ambassador was tall, even by Valari standards, his crimson skin darker than most, his golden eyes carrying a predatory gleam that Marcus recognized from decades of dealing with hospital administrators and military officers. Men who smiled while calculating how best to destroy you. Marcus Webb. The ambassador's voice dripped with false warmth. How delightful that you could join us. I trust you are enjoying your elevation. Just trying to do my job, Ambassador. Ah, yes, your job. Teaching our queen about human customs. Vorath's smile widened. Tell me, what customs have you shared most recently? What intimate lessons have you provided? The implication was clear and ugly. Marcus felt heat rise in his face but kept his voice level. Her Majesty has expressed interest in understanding ordinary human life. I have been sharing ordinary human experiences. Nothing more. Nothing more. Vorath's eyes hardened. We shall see. He swept away to greet other guests, leaving Marcus with the distinct impression that something terrible was about to happen. The wine arrived 30 minutes later. A server approached Marcus with a tray of crystal glasses filled with pale violet liquid, and without thinking, he accepted one. The wine was sweet, slightly floral, pleasant enough that he finished it quickly and accepted a second. He never finished the second glass. The poison struck fast. One moment, Marcus was standing near a window, watching Seraphina move through the crowd with regal grace. The next moment, his vision blurred, his legs buckled, and he crashed to the marble floor with a sound that silenced every conversation in the room. Voices swirled above him. Someone called for medical assistance. Someone else suggested removing him from the hall before he caused further embarrassment. Through the haze of pain and confusion, Marcus heard Vorath's smooth voice expressing concern that was entirely unconvincing. Then another voice cut through the chaos, a voice that carried the weight of empires. Move aside, all of you, move aside now. Marcus felt hands on his face, gentle hands, familiar hands. He forced his eyes open and found Seraphina kneeling beside him, her gown pooling on the marble, her expression fierce with terror. She should not have been there. A queen did not kneel beside servants, did not touch dying humans with her bare hands, did not let the entire world see her vulnerable and afraid. She did not seem to care. Tell me what to do. Her voice was steady despite her fear. Tell me how to help you. Through the fog of the poison, Marcus felt his medical training fighting for control. He recognized the symptoms. Valari neurotoxin, fast-acting but neutralizable if treated quickly. Alkaline solution, he forced the words out through numb lips. Need to neutralize the acid. Concentration about 8%. Inject or ingest within 10 minutes. Seraphina relayed the instructions to her guards with crisp authority. Someone produced a medical kit. Someone else mixed the solution under Marcus's mumbled guidance. Seraphina held his head steady while the antidote was administered, her fingers brushing through his gray hair, her whispered encouragement the only thing keeping him anchored to consciousness. The crowd watched in stunned silence. In a single moment, the Queen of the Valari Empire had revealed more emotional vulnerability than she had shown in 80 years of rule. Ambassador Vorath's expression, when Marcus finally managed to focus on it, was a mask of barely controlled fury. Recovery came slowly. Marcus spent 3 days in the embassy's medical wing, drifting in and out of consciousness, while his body fought off the remnants of the poison. Seraphina visited whenever she could escape her official duties, sitting beside his bed in silence, holding his hand in defiance of every protocol her culture demanded. On the third day, Counselor Lyris came to see him. The old advisor was ancient, even by Valari standards. Her crimson skin faded to pale rose, her silver hair arranged in elaborate patterns that marked her rank. She moved slowly, deliberately, each step carrying the weight of centuries of accumulated wisdom. Marcus Webb, she settled into a chair beside his bed. You have caused quite a stir. Not intentionally. Few important things happen intentionally. Lyris studied him with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. Do you know why I am here? To warn me off? The old counselor laughed, a dry sound like autumn leaves. No, I am here because 3 nights ago I watched you tend to an injured guard, a young man who had been told his entire life that humans were inferior, barely civilized, incapable of compassion. Marcus remembered the incident. I just saw someone who needed help. Precisely. Lyris leaned forward. Do you know what you gave him? Not the medical care. Something far more valuable. You gave him doubt. Doubt about everything he had been taught. Doubt that might save his life someday when he meets another human and must choose between prejudice and possibility. She paused, her ancient eyes boring into his. And now I will give you something in return. Information. Lyris lowered her voice. Ambassador Vorath is not simply a jealous cousin or a disapproving noble. He is part of something larger. A faction within the Valari Empire that believes peaceful coexistence with humanity is a mistake. They want war. They want conquest. And they see Queen Seraphina's friendship with you as an opportunity to discredit her before she signs the treaty. Marcus felt cold despite the warmth of his recovery blankets. Why tell me this? Because the Queen is dying. Lyris's voice cracked slightly. She has 2 years, perhaps less. And until you arrived, I had not seen her smile in 6 decades. Not truly smile, not like she means it. The old counselor stood, her movements stiff with age and emotion. Save her, Marcus Webb, not from the fading. There is no cure for that. Save her from dying without ever having lived. Save her from spending her final years as nothing more than a symbol. She left without waiting for a response. The next afternoon, Marcus was well enough to walk. He made his way to the moon garden expecting to find it empty at midday, and instead found himself face to face with a young Valari woman who radiated hostility like heat from an open flame. Princess Tira was 25 years old in Valari terms, roughly equivalent to an 18-year-old human. She had her aunt's striking features, but none of Seraphina's carefully cultivated composure. Her eyes shifting from gold to angry orange, fixed on Marcus with undisguised contempt. You are the human, the one who has been corrupting my aunt. Marcus sighed. He was too tired for this. Corrupting is a strong word. What would you call it? Tira's voice dripped venom. You have made her weak, made her vulnerable, made her care about things that do not matter. Like what? Like you. The princess stepped closer, her height advantage, forcing Marcus to look up. My father died because humans could not be trusted, because a human diplomat made promises that were never kept, and my father paid the price for believing them. I will not let you do the same to Seraphina. Marcus studied the young woman, seeing past the anger to the grief beneath. The princess was not evil. She was wounded, terrified, lashing out at the nearest target because processing loss was too painful to face directly. He recognized the pattern. He had lived it himself. Your father's death was a tragedy, Marcus said quietly, and whoever was responsible deserves justice. But I am not that person, princess. I am just an old man who happened to walk through the wrong door at the wrong time. You are a threat. I am nobody. A maintenance worker, a widower, a father who buried his son. Marcus let the weight of his own losses enter his voice. I have nothing left to gain and nothing left to lose. The only thing I can offer your aunt is honesty. If that makes me a threat, then your definition of threat needs work. Tira stared at him for a long moment, conflict visible in her shifting eyes. Then she turned and stalked away without another word. Marcus watched her go, wondering if he had just made an enemy or planted a seed of doubt. Time would tell. The confrontation with the Vorath came 2 days later. Marcus was returning to his quarters after a late dinner when the ambassador intercepted him in an empty corridor. This time Vorath made no pretense of friendliness. His expression was cold, calculating, the mask of diplomacy entirely discarded. You should have died. Vorath's voice was soft, almost conversational. The poison was carefully calibrated for human physiology. You should have been dead within 5 minutes. Marcus kept his voice steady despite his pounding heart. Sorry to disappoint. Disappointing does not begin to cover it. Vorath moved closer, his greater height casting Marcus in shadow. Do you have any idea what you have done? The queen knelt beside you, in front of witnesses, in front of cameras. The entire empire saw their ruler abandon her dignity for a human servant. She was saving my life. She was destroying herself. Vorath's golden eyes glowed with barely contained rage. 80 years I have waited, 80 years of patience and planning, building alliances, cultivating supporters, preparing for the day when the throne would finally pass to someone capable of leading the empire to greatness rather than squandering it on sentiment and weakness. Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. You want war. I want what is best for my people. Vorath's voice carried absolute conviction. Humanity is young, chaotic, violent. You destroy your own world with your petty conflicts and short-sighted greed. The Valari could elevate you, guide you, rule you for your own benefit. That sounds like conquest with good intentions. It sounds like responsibility. Vorath smiled without warmth. Serafina was going to sign the treaty in 3 days. A treaty that would bind our hands, prevent us from intervening in human affairs even when intervention is clearly necessary. But now, thanks to your very public rescue, she has become a liability. A queen so compromised by human attachment that her judgment cannot be trusted. What are you planning? The ambassador's smile widened. The treaty signing will proceed as scheduled. And during the ceremony, there will be an unfortunate accident, a radical human faction, a terrorist attack. The queen will become a martyr, and her naive dream of peaceful coexistence will die with her. Princess Terra will inherit the throne far too young and inexperienced to rule effectively. She will need guidance, a regent, someone with vision. Marcus stared at the ambassador, seeing for the first time the full scope of the threat. This was not jealousy or political maneuvering. This was treason on a scale that could reshape the galaxy. You will never get away with it. Who will stop me? Vorath laughed. You, an aging human with bad knees and no weapons. The queen who is dying already from a disease with no cure. The princess who hates your species with every fiber of her being. He leaned in close, his breath hot against Marcus's face. You have 3 days, old man. 3 days to watch everything fall apart. 3 days to know that your meddling will cost billions of lives. And then you will die, knowing you could have prevented none of it. Vorath straightened, adjusting his robes with deliberate precision. Enjoy what time you have left. He walked away, leaving Marcus alone in the empty corridor, the weight of impossible odds settling onto shoulders already burdened by decades of loss. 3 days, 72 hours, 4,320 minutes. Marcus stood in the silence feeling older than he had ever felt. His knees ached. His shoulders still throbbed from the lingering effects of the poison. Every rational part of his brain screamed that this was not his fight, that he was out of his depth, that the smart move was to run as far and as fast as possible. But running had never been his way. Not in the Gulf War when he had crawled through darkness to reach wounded soldiers. Not in the ER when hopeless cases arrived and he fought anyway. Not when Margaret was dying and all he could do was hold her hand and refuse to let go until the very end. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out Thomas's coin. The copper had been worn smooth by years of handling, the design almost invisible. His son had carried it through basic training, through his first deployment, through letters home that grew shorter and more distant with each passing month. The night before Thomas shipped out for his final tour, they had talked on the phone. Thomas had been quiet, subdued, nothing like the confident young Marine he had become. Dad, I am scared. Marcus remembered the words perfectly. Remembered the way his heart had clenched with helpless parental terror. Scared is normal, son. Being brave does not mean being fearless. It means being scared and doing what needs doing anyway. A long pause. Then Thomas had asked the question that still echoed through Marcus's dreams. How do you know what needs doing? You ask yourself who you are fighting for. If the answer matters more than your fear, then you have your answer. Thomas had died 6 weeks later, in Aida in Fallujah. The coin had been in his pocket, recovered by his squad mates, and returned along with the folded flag and the official condolences of a grateful nation. Marcus closed his fingers around the worn copper. Who are you fighting for? The answer came without hesitation. Serafina, the young guard whose arm he had bandaged, Counselor Lyris and her desperate hope, even Princess Tira lost in her grief and rage, billions of humans who would never know how close they had come to annihilation. Margaret and Thomas watching from wherever the dead waited for the living to finish their work. He was fighting for all of them, and that mattered more than his fear. Marcus Webb, 68 years old widower, bereaved father, maintenance worker, took a deep breath and began to plan. The following morning, a woman approached him in the embassy cafeteria. She was human, middle-aged, with dark hair, pulled back in a severe ponytail, and eyes that missed nothing. She sat across from him without asking permission and began to speak without preamble. My name is Elena Reyes, Central Intelligence Agency. I have been watching you for 3 years. Marcus blinked. Excuse me. Your son, Thomas, served with my husband, Miguel. They were in the same unit in Fallujah, same IED. Elena's voice remained steady, professional, but something flickered in her eyes. After they died, I made it my business to know the families, to watch over them when I could. You ended up working in the one place on Earth where I actually have jurisdiction. Marcus stared at her. You have been spying on me, protecting you, or trying to. Elena pulled out a tablet and slid it across the table. Ambassador Varath has been communicating with someone in the Valari military, a general named Kaldros, leader of a faction that wants to end peaceful relations with Earth permanently. Marcus looked at the tablet. Communications logs, encrypted messages, phrases that made his blood run cold. How long have you known? We suspected for months, but we had no proof until the poison attack on you. Vorath used a compound that is only available through military channels. That gave us the connection we needed. So stop him. Marcus pushed the tablet back. You are CI. Call in the Marines. Arrest him. It is not that simple. Elena's jaw tightened with frustration. The embassy is Valari's sovereign territory. We cannot enter without permission, and permission would require explaining how we obtained our intelligence. By the time we navigate the diplomatic channels, the treaty signing will be over. One way or another. Then what do you want from me? Elena met his eyes. You have access. You know the building better than anyone. You have the Queen's trust. And in 72 hours, you might be the only person positioned to stop an assassination that will trigger an interplanetary war. Marcus laughed, the sound hollow even to his own ears. I am 68 years old. I have arthritis and high blood pressure and a shoulder that still hurts from being poisoned. What exactly do you think I can do? I think you can be in the right place at the right time. Elena leaned forward. I think you can gather evidence that we can use after the fact. I think you can warn the Queen. And if everything goes wrong, I think you might be stubborn enough to do something stupid that buys enough time for the cavalry to arrive. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Thomas died in a war. Miguel died in a war. If Varath succeeds, billions more will die in a war. Yes. And you think an old maintenance worker can stop that? Elena almost smiled. I think an old combat medic who crawled through a desert to save his squad might have one more miracle left in him. Marcus picked up the tablet, again studying the communications logs. The evidence was damning. Vorath had been planning this for years, building a network of supporters, positioning assets, waiting for the perfect moment. The treaty signing was that moment. 300 dignitaries from both species. Live broadcast to billions. Maximum symbolic impact. And Serafina would be at the center of it all. What do you need me to do? Elena outlined the plan. Marcus would continue his normal routine, attending his meetings with the Queen, maintaining his cover as a simple cultural advisor. Meanwhile, he would document everything he could about Vorath's activities, security arrangements, and any suspicious behavior. Elena would provide him with recording equipment disguised as ordinary objects. At the treaty signing, Marcus would position himself close enough to intervene if necessary. It was a terrible plan, desperate, likely to fail. But it was the only plan they had. That night, Marcus went to the Moon Garden for what might be his last meeting with Serafina. She was waiting for him on their usual bench, her face illuminated by the soft glow of bioluminescent flowers. She looked tired, fragile in a way that had nothing to do with physical weakness. You know, she said as he sat beside her, when I became queen, I believed I would change the galaxy, make it better, more peaceful, more just. You have done those things. Have I? Serafina's voice carried a weight of doubt. Or have I simply maintained what others built before me, held together an empire through stubbornness rather than vision? Marcus took her hand, no longer caring about protocols or scandals. Vision is overrated. Most of the problems I have seen in 68 years came from people with too much vision and not enough patience. You kept the peace, that matters. The peace is fragile. Serafina's fingers tightened around his. Vorath wants war. I have always known this, but I believed I could manage him. Keep him contained. Buy time. How long have you known what he is planning? I suspected for years. Known for certain for 3 days. Serafina turned to face him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. He approached me yesterday, offered to postpone the treaty in exchange for my public dismissal of you. Exile from the embassy, permanent separation. Marcus felt cold. What did you say? I told him to go to hell? Serafina's voice carried steel beneath the sorrow. In more diplomatic terms, but the meaning was clear. You are the first person in 80 years who has treated me like a person rather than a symbol. I will not sacrifice that. Not for him, not for anyone, even if it costs your life, even then. She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. I am dying anyway, Marcus. The fating does not care about political convenience. But I have learned something from you, something I had forgotten. What that life is not measured by its length. It is measured by its moments, by the connections we make, by the people we allow ourselves to love. The word hung in the air between them. Neither spoke, neither needed to. They sat together until dawn, watching the stars fade into morning light, two impossibly different beings sharing something neither had expected to find. Connection, understanding, hope. And somewhere in the embassy below them, Ambassador Vorath finalized his plans for destruction, unaware that the old man he had dismissed as irrelevant had already begun to fight back. 72 hours until the treaty signing, 72 hours until everything changed. Marcus Webb looked at the copper coin in his hand, felt Serafina's warmth against his side, and made a choice that would determine the fate of two civilizations. He chose to stay, to fight, to hope, because that was what his son would have done, what Margaret would have wanted, what every patient he had ever saved deserved, because some things mattered more than fear. And love, however unlikely, however impossible, was one of them. The second day began with whispers. Marcus noticed them as he walked through the embassy corridors, the subtle shift in how Valari staff looked at him. Some turned away quickly, others stared with open hostility. A few watched with something that might have been curiosity or pity. Vorath had begun his campaign. The rumors spread like poison through water. The human advisor had inappropriate intentions toward the queen. He had manipulated her emotions during a vulnerable moment. He was a spy, a saboteur, a threat to everything the Valari held sacred. Each version grew more elaborate, more damaging, more impossible to refute. Marcus ignored the whispers and focused on his mission. Elena had provided him with recording equipment disguised as ordinary maintenance tools during their meeting the previous night. A scanner that captured audio, a sensor that documented movement patterns, a communicator hidden inside his worn leather watch band. Small advantages against overwhelming odds. He spent the morning mapping security routes, noting guard rotations, identifying blind spots in the embassy's surveillance system. 9 months of maintenance work had given him intimate knowledge of the building's infrastructure. Every ventilation shaft, every service corridor, every emergency exit that most residents had forgotten existed. The information went to Elena through encrypted bursts that piggybacked on the embassy's own communication systems. She responded with tactical updates. Vorath had increased security around his private quarters. General Kyaldros had moved a battle group closer to Earth orbit under the guise of ceremonial escort. The window for intervention was shrinking by the hour. That evening, Marcus met Serafina in the Moon Garden for their regular lesson. She wanted to learn about human music, so he had brought a small device loaded with songs from different eras. Jazz from the 1940s, rock from the 1960s, the country ballads Margaret used to love. Serafina listened with her eyes closed, her expression shifting with each new melody. When a slow song came on, something about lost love and second chances, she opened her eyes and looked at him. Dance with me, Marcus blinked. I am not much of a dancer, neither am I. She stood and extended her hand. But you said humans dance when they feel connected. I want to understand. He took her hand and pulled himself up, his knees protesting the movement. They stood facing each other in the soft glow of bioluminescent flowers, uncertain how to begin. Just follow the music. Marcus placed one hand on her waist, the other holding her fingers. And try not to step on my feet. These old bones bruise easily. They swayed together awkward at first, then finding a rhythm that belonged only to them. Serafina rested her head against his shoulder, and Marcus felt something shift in his chest. A warmth he had not experienced since Margaret. "This is nice," she murmured. "Yeah, it is." They danced until the song ended, then stood holding each other in the silence that followed. Marcus knew he should step back, maintain appropriate distance, protect them both from the complications that intimacy would bring. He did not move. "Marcus," Serafina's voice was barely a whisper, "I need to tell you something." He waited. "I have known about Vorath's plans for months." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. Not the details, but the general shape of his ambition. "I have been preparing countermeasures, building alliances, positioning loyal supporters in key positions. Why did you not tell me? Because I needed to know if I could trust you." Her hand rose to touch his cheek. "Not with secrets or strategies, with something more important, with my heart." Marcus covered her hand with his own. "And now I know." She smiled, sad and hopeful at once. "You stayed when leaving would have been safer. You fought for me when fighting seemed impossible. You showed me what human courage looks like. I am just stubborn." "Yes, and that stubbornness may save us both." She explained her plan. The treaty signing would proceed as scheduled. Vorath would make his move, expecting to catch her unprepared. But Serafina had her own network of loyal guards officials who had grown suspicious of the ambassador's activities and off-world allies who would respond to a specific signal. The trap would spring on the trapper. "But I need evidence," she continued. "Something undeniable. Something that will expose Vorath before the entire galaxy and remove any doubt about his guilt." Marcus thought about the recordings he had gathered. Useful but circumstantial, not enough to guarantee conviction in the court of public opinion. "What if we could catch him coordinating with Kaeldros in real time?" Serafina's eyes sharpened. "That would require accessing his private communications. I know where his office is. I have fixed the climate control in that wing 3 times. Marcus felt the plan forming even as he spoke. "If I could get in there during the night before the ceremony, I might be able to tap into his secure channel. The risk would be enormous. The alternative is worse." They stood in silence, weighing options that all led to danger. Finally, Serafina nodded. "Tomorrow night, the eve of the signing, security will be focused on the ceremonial preparations. That is your best window." She reached into her robes and withdrew the heart cloth she had given him days ago. Marcus had been keeping it in his quarters, afraid to carry something so precious. "Take this with you." She pressed it into his hands. "Whatever happens, I want you to know that you have my complete trust, my complete faith." Marcus tucked the cloth into his pocket, feeling its weight against his heart. "I will not let you down." The following evening, Marcus waited until the embassy had settled into its pre-ceremony quiet before making his move. Most of the staff were occupied with final preparations in the main hall. Security patrols had been redirected to protect arriving dignitaries. The administrative wing stood nearly empty. He moved through service corridors he knew by heart, avoiding the main thoroughfares where cameras tracked every movement. His maintenance credentials unlocked doors that would have stopped anyone else. 9 months of invisible labor had made him part of the building's infrastructure, as unremarkable as the pipes and wires he had spent so long repairing. Vorath's office occupied a corner suite on the 3rd floor, protected by a security system that Marcus had helped install 6 months ago. He knew its blind spots, its timing patterns, the 30-second window when the motion sensors cycled through their reset sequence. He slipped inside and found himself in a space that radiated power and ambition. Dark furniture, Valari artwork depicting military victories, a massive desk dominated by holographic displays that currently showed ship movements near Earth orbit. Marcus moved quickly to the communication console, attaching the recording device Elena had provided. The equipment was designed to capture and transmit any signals that passed through the system, creating a real-time record of Vorath's communications with his co-conspirators. The device activated with a soft hum. Connection established. Evidence gathering in progress. Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Then the lights came on. I wondered when you would try something like this. Vorath stood in the doorway flanked by two guards whose weapons were already drawn. The ambassador's expression carried no surprise, only the cold satisfaction of a predator watching its prey walk into a trap. Marcus straightened slowly, keeping his hands visible. Ambassador, did you really think I would not notice your activities? Vorath stepped into the room, his golden eyes gleaming. The questions you have been asking, the equipment you have been positioning, the late-night meetings with your CIA handler. He gestured and the guards moved forward to seize Marcus by the arms. I have been watching you since the moment you walked through that door, old man, waiting for you to make exactly this mistake. Marcus did not struggle. The guards were younger, stronger armed. Resistance would accomplish nothing except additional pain. What happens now? Now Vorath smiled. Now you disappear. A maintenance worker who became unstable, obsessed with the Queen, and had to be quietly removed before he caused an international incident. Your government will receive official apologies. Your body will never be found. He leaned close, his breath hot against Marcus's face. And tomorrow, when Serafina signs that treaty, she will do so believing you abandoned her, that you ran away rather than face the consequences of your inappropriate attachment. Her last thought of you will be disappointment and betrayal. The words cut deeper than any blade could have. Not the threat against his own life, but the cruelty of the lie Vorath planned to tell. She will know the truth. Will she? Vorath's smile widened. I have been manipulating perceptions for 100 years. By the time I am finished, everyone will believe exactly what I want them to believe. He straightened and adjusted his robes with deliberate precision. Take him to the lower detention level. Cell 7, no communications, no visitors, and make sure the security feeds show nothing unusual. The guards dragged Marcus toward the door. He caught one last glimpse of the recording device still attached to the console, still transmitting. Small comfort. Elena would receive the evidence, but without Marcus to testify, without his presence at the ceremony to expose the plot. Would it be enough? The detention level occupied the embassy's basement, a series of reinforced cells originally designed to hold diplomatic prisoners during theoretical conflicts. Marcus had never been down here before. No maintenance requests had ever come from this part of the building. Now he understood why. Cell 7 was small and dark, barely large enough for the narrow bench that served as both seat and bed. The walls were smooth metal, seamless, offering no purchase for fingers or tools. The door sealed with a magnetic lock that could only be opened from outside. The guards shoved him through the entrance and activated the lock without a word. Their footsteps faded down the corridor, leaving Marcus alone with the hum of environmental systems and the weight of his own failure. He sat on the bench and stared at the ceiling. 12 hours until the treaty signing. 12 hours until Vorath made his move. 12 hours until Serafina walked into a trap she might not escape. And Marcus was locked in a box, helpless to do anything but wait. He reached into his pocket and found Thomas's coin still there. The guards had not searched him thoroughly, probably assuming that an old maintenance worker posed no real threat. Their arrogance might prove useful. Marcus turned the coin over in his fingers, feeling the worn copper, remembering all the hands that had touched it before his own. Thomas at 17, nervous before his first deployment. Dad, what if I am not brave enough? You will be, son. Bravery is not about being fearless. It is about being scared and doing what needs doing anyway. Thomas at 23, calling from overseas, his voice carrying exhaustion that no amount of rest could cure. I have seen things, Dad, things I cannot unsee. I know, I saw them too back in my day. You carry them. You keep going, and you find something worth fighting for. Thomas at 25, 3 days before the IED, that ended everything. I love you, Dad. Whatever happens, I want you to know that. I love you too, son. Come home safe. He never did. Marcus pressed the coin against his forehead, letting the metal cool his skin. 30 years since that last conversation. 30 years of wondering what he could have said differently, done differently, been differently. But Thomas had not called looking for different words. He had called looking for connection, for the knowledge that someone loved him, believed in him, would remember him no matter what happened. That was what Marcus could give Serafina now. Not rescue, not heroics. Just the refusal to abandon her even when abandonment seemed inevitable. He stood and began examining his cell with the methodical attention he had applied to thousands of maintenance problems over the decades. Every system had weaknesses. Every design had flaws. The question was whether he could find them before time ran out. The walls were solid, the door impenetrable, the floor and ceiling seamlessly constructed. But the ventilation shaft in the upper corner of the cell, the one providing climate control to this windowless space, that was a different matter. Marcus had installed dozens of similar systems throughout the embassy. He knew their specifications, their tolerances, their limitations. The shaft was narrow, barely wide enough for a human body, but not impossible for someone willing to squeeze. The grate covering the shaft was secured with magnetic bolts. Standard design. Easily defeated if you knew the resonance frequency that would temporarily disrupt the magnetic field. Marcus did not have any equipment capable of generating that frequency, but he did have a belt buckle made of ferromagnetic alloy, and he did have decades of experience jury-rigging solutions from inadequate materials. He removed his belt and began working. The process took hours, repeatedly striking the buckle against different points on the grate, listening for the subtle change in tone that indicated proximity to the magnetic housing, adjusting his technique based on results, fighting the cramping in his hands and the ache in his shoulders that reminded him with every movement that he was 68 years old and far past his prime. But Marcus Webb had never let limitations define his possibilities. Not in the Gulf War when he had crawled through a minefield to reach wounded soldiers. Not in the ER when he had worked 36-hour shifts because patients needed him. Not when Margaret was dying and every moment felt like borrowed time. Stubbornness was not glamorous. It was not inspiring. It was just the refusal to stop when stopping seemed reasonable. The grate finally loosened with a soft click. Marcus caught it before it could clatter to the floor and lowered it silently onto the bench. The shaft beyond was dark, cramped, and probably led nowhere useful. He climbed in anyway. The ventilation system of the Valari embassy was a maze of interconnected passages, some wide enough to move freely, others requiring Marcus to flatten himself and drag his body forward, inch by painful inch. He navigated by memory, reconstructing the building's layout in his mind, choosing paths that should lead upward toward the main floors. His wounded shoulder screamed with every movement. The poisoning had weakened him more than he wanted to admit, and the stress of the past days had depleted reserves he could not afford to lose. Sweat soaked through his clothing. His breath came in ragged gasps that echoed too loudly in the confined space. But he kept moving. The shaft branched at regular intervals, offering choices that could mean the difference between escape and dead ends. Marcus paused at each junction, pressing his ear against the metal, listening for sounds that would indicate proximity to occupied areas. Voices reached him through a grate to his left. Two guards discussing the ceremony preparations, complaining about extra shifts, and demanding dignitaries. Marcus filed away the information and continued past them. Further along, he heard something else. A familiar voice sharp with anger and frustration. Princess Tira arguing with someone about protocol violations and insufficient security measures. Marcus altered his course following the sound until he reached a grate overlooking a small antechamber. Tira stood alone now, her back to the wall, her expression a mixture of fury and fear that reminded him painfully of his own children at similar ages. She was scared, angry at herself for being scared, lashing out at everything within reach because the alternative was confronting emotions she did not know how to process. Marcus made a decision that might have been foolish. He knocked softly on the grate. Tira spun her hand, going to the weapon at her belt. Her eyes scanned the room, finding nothing until Marcus knocked again. "Up here, keep your voice down." The princess located the grate and stared at him with an expression of complete disbelief. "What are you doing in the ventilation system?" "Escaping from your uncle's detention cell." Marcus kept his voice low. "Long story, but I need your help." "My help?" Tira's tone carried familiar hostility, but underneath it he heard something different. Uncertainty. Doubt. "Why would I help you?" "Because Vorath is going to kill your aunt tomorrow." Marcus held her gaze through the metal slats. Not remove her from power, not force her abdication. Kill her. Make it look like human terrorists. Use her death to start a war. Tira's face went pale. "You are lying. I am in a ventilation shaft covered in dust and blood from climbing through spaces not designed for human bodies." Marcus fought to keep his voice steady. "I have been imprisoned without trial for trying to gather evidence against a man who wants to destroy everything your aunt has built. Does any of that sound like the behavior of someone with time for lies? The princess stared at him, conflict visible in every line of her body. She had spent years hating humans, blaming them for her father's death, building walls against anyone who threatened her comfortable certainty. Now those walls were crumbling. My father died because of humans. Your father died because of specific humans who made specific choices. Marcus chose his words carefully. Just like specific Valari are making specific choices right now that will kill millions of innocents on both sides. Species does not determine morality. Actions do. Tira was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller than he had ever heard it. I heard my uncle talking to someone, a military commander. They spoke of the ceremony as an opportunity, of acceptable losses, of necessary sacrifices for the greater good of the empire. Do you believe that, Marcus asked, that your aunt's death would serve the greater good? No. The word came out broken, almost a sob. She raised me. After my father died, after my mother abandoned me, Serafina was the only one who stayed. She taught me everything, loved me when I made it impossible. Tears streamed down the princess's face, the first she had allowed herself in years. I do not want her to die. I do not want any of this, but I do not know what to do. Marcus reached through the grate, his fingers just barely able to brush her shoulder. Help me get out of here. Help me reach the ceremony. Your aunt has a plan, but she needs evidence delivered at the right moment. I can provide that. And then we stop Vorath together. Marcus held her eyes. After that, you can go back to hating me if you want. But right now, in this moment, we both love the same person. That has to be enough. Tira wiped her eyes with an angry gesture, embarrassed by her own vulnerability. She looked at the grate, then at the room around her, calculating options. There is a maintenance access panel in the hallway outside. It connects to the shaft network you are using. If I open it, you should be able to exit without triggering the security sensors, and you will not turn me in. The princess met his gaze with something that might have been the beginning of respect. Not today. She moved toward the door, then paused. Marcus, if you fail, if my aunt dies because I trusted you, I will hunt you across the galaxy. Fair enough. Tira nodded once and disappeared through the doorway. Marcus waited, counting seconds, listening for the sounds of betrayal that would mean his gamble had failed. Instead, he heard a soft click as the access panel opened. The embassy's main hall blazed with light and in ceremony. 300 dignitaries filled tiered seating arranged around the central dais where Queen Serafina would sign the treaty that would bind humanity and the Valari together for generations. Cameras broadcast the event to billions of viewers across two worlds. History watched, waiting to be made. Marcus entered through a service door near the back of the chamber, his maintenance uniform exchanged for borrowed formal wear that Tira had provided. He looked presentable, if not elegant, anonymous enough to avoid immediate attention. Serafina sat on her throne at the far end of the hall, resplendent in ceremonial armor that gleamed like captured starlight. Her expression revealed nothing of the fear she must have felt, the uncertainty about whether her plans would succeed or whether Vorath had outmaneuvered her. Their eyes met across the crowded space, a flicker of recognition, of relief, of something deeper that neither of them had words for. Marcus gave her the smallest possible nod. I am here. I did not abandon you. Whatever happens next, we face it together. Vorath occupied a position of honor near the dais, surrounded by supporters whose loyalty had been purchased with promises of power in the new order. The ambassador looked confident, relaxed, certain that his careful planning had accounted for every variable. He had not accounted for stubbornness. The ceremony proceeded through preliminary speeches and formal acknowledgments. Earth's Secretary General spoke of bridges between worlds. The Valari High Counselor invoked traditions of diplomacy and mutual respect. Each word brought the moment of signing closer. Marcus watched Vorath throughout, tracking the ambassador's subtle signals to Confederates positioned around the chamber. A touch of the ear, an adjustment of robes. Small gestures that meant nothing to casual observers, but carried deadly significance to those who knew what to look for. The attack would come during the signing itself. Maximum symbolic impact, maximum chaos. Elena's voice crackled through his hidden earpiece. Marcus, the recording device is still transmitting. We have Vorath's communications with Kaeldros from last night. Orders to proceed. Confirmation of assassin placement. Everything. Can you broadcast it working on it? We need access to the ceremony's display systems. Marcus scanned the hall, locating the technical booth where operators manage the holographic displays and broadcast equipment. Two of Varath's people were stationed there, ready to ensure that certain recordings never survive the coming chaos. But Counselor Lyra stood nearby, ancient and watchful, her network of loyal servants positioned throughout the chamber. She caught Marcus's eye and raised one silver eyebrow in question. He gestured toward the technical booth. She nodded, understanding. The Secretary General concluded his remarks and stepped aside. Serafina rose from her throne and approached the central dais where the treaty documents waited. Two copies, one in English, one in Valari script, binding agreements that would shape the future of two species. Serafina lifted the ceremonial pen, its crystal length catching the light. She looked out at the assembled dignitaries, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries. Today we take a step that our ancestors could never have imagined. Two peoples born under different stars, choosing to walk forward together, choosing peace over fear, choosing connection over isolation. Marcus saw Vorath's hand drift toward his belt, the signal device, the trigger. This treaty represents more than political agreement. Serafina continued, her voice steady. It represents faith. Faith that understanding can triumph over suspicion. Faith that compassion can bridge any divide. Vorath's fingers closed around the device. And it is that faith, Serafina said, that has already been tested. The holographic display above the chamber flickered and changed. Instead of ceremonial imagery, it now showed recorded communications. Ambassador Vorath meeting with shadowy figures, coordinating with General Kaldros, discussing assassination timelines and acceptable casualties. The hall erupted. Vorath lunged to his feet, his careful composure shattered. The signal device in his hand activated, sending commands to agents positioned throughout the chamber. But Serafina's loyal guards were already moving, intercepting the assassins before they could reach their weapons. Except one. A single figure burst from the crowd near the dais, moving with desperate speed. A Valari servant, face twisted with fanatical loyalty, an energy blade crackling in his grip. The guards were too far away. The distance too great, the assassin too fast. Marcus ran. His knees screamed, his shoulder burned. Every cell in his body protested the demand being placed upon it. He did not care. The assassin reached the dais. Serafina turned to face her death with the quiet dignity that had defined her reign. Marcus crashed into the attacker from the side, his momentum carrying them both away from the queen. The energy blade sliced through his shoulder instead of her heart, sending agony screaming through his nervous system. They hit the ground hard, Marcus on top, his hands grappling for the weapon. The assassin was stronger, faster. Every physical advantage belonged to the younger Valari. But Marcus had something the assassin lacked. He had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The knife he had hidden against his ankle found its way into his hand, a small blade. Insignificant against Valari physiology under normal circumstances. But Marcus had spent decades learning where bodies were vulnerable regardless of species. Steel slipped between ribs. The assassin's eyes widened with shock. Then he went limp. Marcus rolled off the body, clutching his wounded shoulder. Blood soaked through his clothing, human red stark against the formal wear. The pain was extraordinary, a burning that seemed to consume his entire left side. But Serafina was alive. Standing above him, her face a mask of terror and desperate hope. Guards swarmed around them. Vorath was being subdued, his supporters rounded up, his carefully constructed conspiracy collapsing in real time. Marcus looked up at the queen through a haze of agony. Did we win? Serafina dropped to her knees beside him, her hands pressing against his wound, her tears falling like violet rain. Yes, we won. Now stay with me. Stay with me, Marcus. He wanted to respond, wanted to tell her that staying sounded wonderful, that he had found something worth living for after years of merely existing. The darkness had other plans. Awareness returned slowly, like dawn creeping over a horizon. Beeping monitors, soft light, the antiseptic smell of medical facilities mixed with something floral and alien. Marcus opened his eyes to find himself in a bed surrounded by Valari technology that hummed with quiet efficiency. The readings on nearby displays meant nothing to him, but the steady rhythms suggested stability. He was alive. That seemed improbable. Tira sat in a chair beside his bed, her posture rigid with exhaustion, dark circles shadowing her eyes. She noticed his awareness and straightened. "You are awake, finally. How long?" "4 days." The princess's voice carried none of its former hostility. "You almost died. The blade carried toxins. Your heart stopped twice during surgery." The doctors were not optimistic. Marcus processed this information slowly. 4 days, toxins, heart failure, Serafina alive. Tira glanced toward the door. "She has barely left your side. I convinced her to rest an hour ago. She needed sleep more than she needed to watch you breathe." Something in the princess's tone made Marcus look at her more carefully. The anger that had defined their previous interactions was gone, replaced by something more complex. "You helped me. Back in the corridor. With the access panel, yes." Why Tira was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried vulnerability he had never heard before. "Because you were right. About species not determining morality. About actions mattering more than origins." She looked down at her hands. "I spent years hating humans. Blaming your kind for my father's death. It was easier than facing the grief. And now, well, I understand that hate is a cage." The princess met his eyes. "My aunt showed me that by loving you, by refusing to let prejudice dictate her heart. And you showed me by risking everything for someone you had known barely 3 weeks." She stood and moved toward the door. "I am not ready to forgive, not completely. The wounds are too deep, the history too painful. But I am ready to try understanding." She paused at the threshold. "And I am ready to learn." Then she was gone, leaving Marcus alone with the hum of machines and the weight of everything that had changed. The door opened again minutes later. Serafina entered, her steps faltering when she saw him awake. She crossed the room in 3 quick strides and took his hand, her grip fierce with relief. "You stubborn, impossible man." Tears gathered in her eyes. "I gave you specific instructions to survive. I followed them. Barely." She pressed his hand against her cheek, holding it there like something precious. "The doctors said your human physiology should not have withstood the trauma. They called it medically inexplicable." "Stubbornness." Marcus managed a weak smile. "It runs in the family." Serafina laughed through her tears, a sound musical and broken and beautiful. She told him everything while he recovered. Vorith was in custody, his conspiracy dismantled, his supporters scattered. General Kyeldros had been stripped of command and recalled to face charges of treason. The treaty had been signed in the chaos following Marcus's intervention, witnessed by 300 dignitaries and broadcast to billions. Humanity and the Valari were officially allied to it. And there is something else. Serafina's expression grew serious. About the fading, Marcus felt his chest tighten. The disease, the death sentence that had hung over her for years. "The doctors examined me yesterday." She met his eyes. "The progression has stopped. Stopped, not reversed, not cured, but no longer advancing." She squeezed his hand. "They believe it is connected to emotional state, to hope, to connection." The implication hung between them, unspoken but understood. "Loving you is keeping me alive, Marcus. Literally, physiologically. The bond we share has changed something fundamental in my biology." He did not know what to say. The queen of an interstellar empire telling him that his love had altered the course of her existence. "I am not sure I deserve that kind of importance." Serafina smiled, the expression carrying centuries of wisdom and hard-won peace. "You do not get to decide that. I do, and I am never wrong about the things that matter." Recovery took weeks. The Valari medical technology accelerated healing beyond anything human medicine could achieve. But Marcus's body had been pushed past its limits. There were setbacks, complications, days when he felt worse than the day before. But Serafina was there. Every morning, every evening, reading to him when sleep would not come, holding his hand through the difficult moments, simply existing beside him when words were not necessary. They talked during the quiet hours, about their pasts, their losses, the grief they had carried, and the hope they had found in each other. Marcus told her about Margaret, about Thomas, about all the patients he had saved and the ones he had lost. Serafina told him about her husband assassinated 60 years ago, about the child they had wanted but never had, about the centuries of loneliness that had nearly consumed her. They were two broken people who had somehow become whole together. Princess Tira visited regularly, her hostility slowly transforming into genuine curiosity. She asked questions about human customs, human history, human ways of processing grief. Marcus answered honestly, sharing the hard lessons that life had taught him. One afternoon, she arrived with an unusual request. "Teach me to fish." Marcus blinked. "Fishing, you mentioned it during your lessons with my aunt. That humans fish to learn patience, to understand waiting for valuable things." Tira lifted her chin with familiar defiance. "I want to learn. There are no fish in the embassy. Then teach me the principle. The waiting. The trust that effort matters even when results are not immediate." Marcus studied the young woman before him, so different from the angry princess who had confronted him weeks ago. Still guarded, still wounded, but willing to grow. "All right," he gestured to the chair beside his bed. "First lesson. Patience means accepting that you cannot control outcomes. Only effort." Tira sat and listened with the same intensity she had once applied to combat training. Marcus taught her about casting lines and reading water, about the meditation of repetitive motion, and the peace of accepting uncertainty. By the end of the hour, she was not a fisherman, but she was beginning to understand why fishing mattered. The formal recognition ceremony took place 6 weeks after the treaty signing. Marcus stood in the same hall where he had nearly died, surrounded by dignitaries who had witnessed the chaos in its resolution. Serafina addressed the assembly with quiet authority. "We gather today to honor those who have served with extraordinary courage, who have placed the welfare of others above personal safety, who have demonstrated that the bonds between peoples are stronger than the forces that seek to divide us." She descended from the dais and stood before Marcus close enough that he could see emotions shimmering in her eyes. "Marcus Webb, you came to this embassy as a maintenance worker, a man seeking quiet anonymity after a lifetime of service. Instead, you found yourself at the center of events that will shape the future of two civilizations." She reached into her robes and withdrew a medallion that glowed within her light. "This is the Star of Serenity, the highest honor the Valari Empire can bestow. It has been awarded only 7 times in our history to those who have changed the course of worlds through selfless action." The medallion settled around his neck, warm against his chest. "But more than honors, more than recognition, I offer you something else." Serafina's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow reached every corner of the hall. "My trust, my gratitude, my heart." She leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his, the sacred gesture of Valari bonding, performed before hundreds of witnesses. The crowd fell silent, understanding the significance of what they were seeing. When they separated, Marcus found his voice. "I do not have titles to offer. No empires, no grand gestures. Just an old man with bad knees and a stubborn streak." Serafina smiled. "That is exactly what I want." 6 months passed. Spring arrived in Washington, warming the air and painting the world in shades of green and renewal. The embassy gardens bloomed with both earth flowers and Valari imports, a hybrid landscape that reflected everything that had changed. Marcus stood on a balcony overlooking the city, the Star of Serenity, catching sunlight on his chest. He wore Valari robes, now simple and comfortable, a symbol of his new role as cultural liaison between species. The position had been created specifically for him, a bridge between worlds that required someone who understood both without belonging entirely to either. It was not glamorous work, long hours, endless negotiations, the slow, patient building of understanding between peoples who had every reason for suspicion. He loved it. Footsteps announced Tira's arrival. The princess carried fishing equipment, her expression focused with determination. "Ready for today's lesson?" "Almost." Marcus turned from the view. "First, I want to show you something." He led her to the embassy's new meditation garden, where a small pond had been installed at Serafina's request. Cherry blossoms from Earth grew alongside luminescent Valari flowers, creating a space that belonged to neither world and both. Serafina waited beside the water, her presence announced by the subtle straightening of Marcus's spine. Even after months together, she still had that effect on him. The three of them settled on a stone bench at the pond's edge. Marcus distributed the fishing gear with practiced efficiency. "Today, we catch nothing," he said. "That is the lesson." Tira frowned. "The lesson is failure. The lesson is accepting that not everything can be controlled." Marcus cast his line into the water with a smooth motion born of decades of practice. "You can prepare perfectly, execute flawlessly, do everything right. and still not get what you want. That seems like a lesson in futility. No, Marcus watched his line drift across the still water. It is a lesson in finding meaning in the process rather than the outcome, in trusting that effort matters even when results are invisible. Serafina added her own line to the water. When I was young, I believed that power meant control, that being queen meant shaping events according to my will. She smiled at the memory. It took centuries to understand that power is actually about influence, about planting seeds and trusting them to grow. Tira absorbed this, her expression thoughtful. She cast her own line with improving technique. They sat in comfortable silence, three people from two worlds united by the improbable bonds that circumstance and choice had forged. The sun climbed higher, the water sparkled, and somewhere beneath the surface, fish continued to ignore their offerings. But that was all right. The fishing was never really about the fish. Marcus felt Serafina's hand find his, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long familiarity. On his other side, Tira concentrated on her line with fierce intensity that was slowly softening into something like peace. "This is nice," Serafina murmured. "This moment, this feeling." "Yeah." Marcus squeezed her hand. "It is." He thought about Thomas, about Margaret, and about all the loss and grief that had shaped him into the person he had become. The pain was still there, would always be there, but it no longer defined him. Happiness, Marcus had learned, was not the absence of sorrow. It was the presence of meaning, connection, purpose, love. It was finding something worth fighting for and someone worth fighting beside. He had found both. The cherry blossoms drifted on a gentle breeze, pink petals mixing with luminescent pollen from alien flowers. Somewhere in the embassy, diplomats negotiated treaties and officials managed crises. The work of building peace continued, slow and patient and necessary. But here in this small garden, three people sat beside still water and learned to wait together. And that was enough. That was everything. Marcus Webb, 68 years old, widower, father soldier, healer, lover and friend, closed his eyes and smiled. He was exactly where he was supposed to be.